As I was saying before I was interrupted...
For obvious reasons, this was not the late night that I was used to growing, but this was.
A highly anticipated new Broadway musical which opens on Thursday at the Lunt-Fontanne Theater. Please welcome Nathan Lane and Bebe Neuwirth and the cast of The Addams Family.
Letterman was almost like a permanent fixture in my house. My dad watched him every night, and for the life of me, I just couldn't understand why. His dry and sardonic humor just never made sense to me. And looking at my dad and most of the people in his audience, I just thought his audience were dads who guzzled beer, kicked back on the sofa, and maybe identified with Al Bundy. When I asked my mom about if she liked Letterman, she would point that she would watch him sometimes, and she really liked his interviews. The only other people I knew were Jay Leno, who neither of my parents seemed to care for. There was Craig Ferguson, Jimmy Kimmel, and Conan O'Brien, but my parents were of a different generation and didn't seem too interested in what they were doing. The first time I was somewhat interested was that clip I just showed. I was a budding theater enthusiast, and I'll leave it at that. I loved the Addams Family movies growing up. It was also one of the first times I realized how late night was part of the lexicon of New York City, a place I was deeply entrenched by. I wouldn't really get into late night until my exploration of SNL when I was a preteen, but this was a start. I'm old enough to remember when late night transitioned to the earlier days of social media, a traditional medium bubbling its way through a turbulent media landscape, but somehow it survived. It survived scandals, a pandemic, and shrinking budgets. But now with competition to traditional forms of media, and even free speech vulnerable to threats and silence, will it survive this time? Before there was television, there was the radio. It was the main source of information and entertainment at that time. While today the phenomenon of television doesn't really hold that much weight, television was seen as something new, different, and unfamiliar. Late-night television was not exactly a factor when it was first introduced. In 1949, shows like The Ed Sullivan Show, Lawrence Welk, and The Today Show dominated the airwaves, but those only lasted until a certain time. Once 10 or 11 p.m. came around, there was nothing but static. Programmers needed something to fill in the time, and thus late-night television was born. Sort of. The first pioneer of late-night television was actually Faye Emerson.
Hello. This is Faye Emerson for Pepsi-Cola.
She was an actress who occasionally did interviews and provided some political commentary, usually from what seemed to be in a living room. However, it did not last, and we move on to Steve Allen, who is considered the first host of The Tonight Show. He was known for his outrageous stunts and his slapstick style. One of his stunts that never actually happened was that he was supposed to shoot out from a cannon and land into someone's pool, but that someone from his team came to their senses and said, "Hey, let's not do that." Allen would eventually leave, wanting to pursue other things. And then we get Jack Paar. Paar was a bit different from Allen in that instead of his routine being mostly slapstick, he was known for his monologues, which touched a lot of his family life, which I guess also eventually got him fired, suspended. We don't really know. Basically, he was telling a joke that had something to do with the toilet, but back then you couldn't explicitly say that, so it ended up getting censored, which prompted his infamous exit from the show where he walked off the stage during a taping. He didn't quit, instead he took a break from the ordeal, but then eventually he did decide to leave. Paar is important because he created the format that we know late night to be now: monologue, interview, performance. After that, we get this guy. Carson was on a couple of shows before he became the host of The Tonight Show, mostly game shows. I'm too young to know much about Johnny Carson, but my first introduction to him was through this video.
And she is just 7 years old. Would you welcome, please, Drew Barrymore.
Carson was an integral part of the show and of pop culture for a good 3 decades. He set the precedent of what a host could be and inspired many like him. He also started what became the guest host, not on purpose though. Carson had been on the show for many years at this point, and because late night shows had very tight turnarounds, he didn't have much time for vacations. So he decided to come up with an idea of a guest host. Carson also introduced the world to Joan Rivers, who had also been a guest on his show since the 60s. Around this time, The Tonight Show had a rotation of guest hosts that included Jay Leno, Gary Shandling, and Joan Rivers. Meanwhile, Johnny Carson was the king of late night at this point, and he was known as the funniest man on television, but behind the scenes, he was known as a stoic of sorts. Joan Rivers would then go on to Fox to host The Late Show, but she was also blackballed from ever appearing on any other late-night talk shows on NBC. This was done by Carson as what he would call an act of betrayal. Around this time, they had shows like The Tracy Ullman Show, which would eventually branch off into The Simpsons, and they still needed a host to fill the late-night show spot. So as Letterman and Leno were vying for that position, Joan went on to host The Joan Rivers Show, which had very high ratings and a very popular cult following. Like in its initial roots, late night was getting another weird and crazy fun feel to it. At least that's what we thought. The Rivers Show would start off well, but then ratings would drop as the season progressed until it was eventually canceled. Carson has been accused of blackballing Rivers, which played a part in the show getting canceled, but that was never confirmed. Also, the Joan Rivers Show was canceled, but she was canceled, not necessarily the show. And Fox would replace the marquee with...
And now, do you want fries with that? It's Arsenio!
So another thing I forgot to mention was how popular the show was. The show lasted from 1989 until 1994, and during that time he had guests like Michael Jackson, Eddie Murphy, Prince, and even Bill Clinton. And he was also low-key kind of responsible for how late night was reframing itself.
And now, a man who shouldn't be up this late, David Letterman!
David Letterman hosted The Late Night, and it had astronomical views. This is coming off when he had his morning talk show, and he was a regular guest on The Tonight Show. Letterman had a journalistic background. He was a weatherman before he moved to Los Angeles to pursue comedy, and because of that, he was not one to placate people who he deemed were in positions of authority. It made him one of the most influential talk show hosts and reinvented what late night could be. But he was also seen as a deterrent for NBC executives. Jay Leno was also popular at this time, but you can learn more about his story and just the overall rivalry. You can learn more about the overall rivalry between the two in the movie The Late Shift. Meanwhile, David Letterman is doing really well, but he really wants The Tonight Show. But because of his polarizing relationship with executives, he was basically given the runaround, and he decided to take an offer with CBS and eventually create The Late Show, a show that has been at the center of controversy as of late. But we'll get to that later. Carson has his last show, and The Tonight Show is given to Jay Leno. Alright, I have spent a good amount of time telling you the early history, so now I'm going to go with a fire round, so if I don't go into all the details, since then, I'm very sorry. Many new men entered the chat of late night across networks, including this man, and this man, and this man, and this big orange man, and this lady, and this man, and this man. Another fight to the death happened when it came to late night, and one man gave up the show to another man, only to take it back when the other show didn't work, and then he had a show for a while, and that other man went on a tour. Meanwhile, one unlikely man is gaining steam and plays in what I would say a huge role in late night transitioning to internet. But, actually I take that back, it was mostly this man again. Anyway, late night had a couple of hits on the internet, and it seemed to be transitioning well into social media, and in general, the overall pop zeitgeist that many people predicted it would eventually fade away into. With the proliferation of the internet also came the accessible nature of the general public as well as divisive politics. We were just at the helm of President Trump's agenda that included mass deportation of immigrants, the reversal of the Roe v. Wade Act, as well as the building of a wall. The election was between Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton and Republican nominee Donald Trump, and at this time Trump's campaign trail included a stint at SNL and appearances on late-night talk shows to soften his persona, or appearance, as you would say. With the election of President Trump came impressions of him, most notably from more Democratic and more left-leaning TV personalities. And as the years go by, many of Trump's initial agenda plans were rejected initially. And then 2020 comes around, with the whole world on lockdown due to COVID-19 pandemic. President Trump loses the election to Joe Biden. 4 years pass, and President Trump wins against Democratic nominee and Vice President Kamala Harris. And then flash forward to
Before we start the show, I want to let you know something that I found out just last night. Next year will be our last season. The network will be ending The Late Show in May. And
With Paramount now merging with Skydance, that has left many other TV personalities under fire for comments that they might have said about President Trump. And now that leaves many people who work at CBS and other companies under Paramount that are fearful for their jobs because of comments that they might have said against the administration or against President Trump. Also, since I recorded this video, Jimmy Kimmel Live was also canceled for comments that Jimmy Kimmel made in regarding to conservatives' response to the assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. Since then, his show has been brought back on air by Disney, ABC, as well as Sinclair and Nexstar TV groups. I don't necessarily know where late night goes after this. I don't know what will happen. I feel like with the internet, there is more accessibility for people to make their own content and make their own shows, and that has often drawn away attention from late night shows in general because if it's a very outdated format. However, I don't know now with the introduction of possibly being silenced because of opinions or critiques over the administration or over Trump. I don't know where this goes from here. If you liked it, please leave a like, please comment, and if you care to, if you want to subscribe, that'd be great. So it helps me in the algorithm and so forth. And now I think I'm gonna end this video the way I started it.
Thank you. Anyway, as I was saying before I was interrupted,